Hello everyone, and welcome back to Girlsplaining Gaming. I am so excited to be bringing you this video because we are going to be talking about one of my favorite games ever, which is Magic: The Gathering. Magic is a card game, it's also a bit of a collectibles thing, and it's considered one of the hardest games ever to learn, and there's new things coming out all the time, so there's always more to learn, but the concept is pretty simple. So let me walk you through it. Basically, you're going to start out with an amount of life, usually 20, and you are going to try to be the last one standing when your opponent or opponents have no more life. Pretty simple, right? But it gets complicated really quickly. The way that the game basically works is that by paying mana, which is a sort of currency, you are going to create essentially an army and use both short and long-term effects to be the last one standing while your opponents have no life left. You have a hand of cards, a draw pile that's called your library, a discard pile that's called your graveyard, and then cards can be put in exile, which means that you can't use them in the game again. This is different from the graveyard because there are ways that you can access things in your graveyard to use them. This will be a lot to take in at once, but let's start by talking about the phases of the game because this is really important to the way it works and I'll be referencing it throughout the video. So first is your beginning phase, and this has different parts to it. You have an untap step, so when you use things, sometimes they get tapped, so you know that you can't use them again this turn, and they will get untapped and refreshed whenever your turn begins. Then you have upkeep. If there's effects that happen on this step, it will be mentioned in your cards, and you'll perform those tasks then. Then you have a draw phase. At the beginning of every turn, again, unless a card has changed this, you're going to draw one card. Then you have something called the main phase, which is when you can play spells and other permanents using your mana. Then you have a combat phase. You have the beginning of combat, you declare attackers, the other player can declare blockers, then damage happens, and then it's the end of combat. Next is a second main phase where you can play things again, it's the same as the first one, and then an ending phase which consists of your end step and a cleanup step. And this is a chance for the other player or players to do things on your turn, which they have some cards that have those abilities. One of the defining factors about Magic that's really important to it is the colors of the cards. There's red, green, blue, white, and black. Each of them has a different personality, so I'll tell you a little bit about those. Red is going to be fast, cheap, and aggressive. Green is going to be ramp, which is getting more mana out from your library. And then you're going to get up some large creatures and lots of counters to make them even bigger. Sometimes it'll take a little longer to get those things out, but they're really heavy hitters. I would definitely recommend this for beginners because while the interactions can get complex, the concepts behind them are usually pretty simple. You just pay lots of mana to put big things out there and then attack with them. Blue is all about control, counter spells, and card draw. You're going to be playing from your hand a lot in this and trying to make the other player not be able to play. Black is all about removal and sacrifice. Sometimes these will have death touch, which we'll talk about later, but basically it's just a way that you can instantly kill your opponent's creatures, and there's a lot of graveyard access, so you can get back to things that have died or you've sacrificed. White is all about life gain, tokens, and counters. Again, some more vocabulary that we'll go over, but this one is kind of the opposite of black in its personality. There's also lots of multicolor options, so a deck or even a single card can have multiple colors on it and it'll have a combination of those personalities or abilities. There are a bunch of card types that do different things in the game and they will all interact differently. At a very basic level, you have permanents and non-permanents, and permanents are things like creatures or enchantments that are going to stay on the battlefield and have effects, and non-permanents are things like instants or sorceries that will have a one-time effect and then they will be discarded. There are 7 main card types that I'll be going over today, and just something to note is that if it's not a land and it's being played from your hand, that's going to be called a spell. So the main card types I'll be going over are creature, enchantment, sorcery, instant, land, planeswalker, and artifact. Creatures are going to be the main way that you build your army on the battlefield. They have a power and a toughness, which is how much damage they can deal and how much damage they can take. And then they also might have abilities, and they are able to attack the other player. Enchantments are permanents. You play them during your main phase, and they will have an effect on you, your opponent, or a target card. The difference between enchantments and sorceries is that the enchantment will have a lasting effect because it'll stay on the battlefield, and the sorcery is more of a one-time effect. But you do still play it during your main phase. The difference between sorceries and instants also will have an effect on you, an opponent, or a target card, but you can play those at any time. And that's something that's called going on the stack. So when you play a card, if someone else responds to it, which they get a chance to do if it's at instant speed, that will also go on the stack. And then if you play something else on the stack, that's also on there. The way that these resolve is that this one goes first, and then this one, and then this one. So it, stacks up and then resolves from the top down. So all of the effects will still happen. They will just happen in that specific order, which is really important in some games. Next, we'll talk about lands. Lands are just the way that you pay for things. So when I say mana and land, I'm kind of referring to the same thing. You just tap a land to play mana. And there's other ways to get mana, but usually it's just lands that you put out. A planeswalker acts as a second player. These are interesting. They have something called loyalty counters, and they have abilities that will either add to that loyalty counter or take away from it. And those are powerful abilities. The one thing to know about this is that because it's a second player, it is able to be directly attacked by the other player's creatures. So normally when you're declaring attackers, you're just doing a wide swing. You can't say, I'm attacking this creature or I'm attacking that one. With planeswalkers, you can say, I'm attacking you, the opponent, or I'm attacking your planeswalker. So you definitely want to play these when you have enough defenses to be able to keep them alive. Lastly, let's talk about artifacts. Artifacts are usually colorless, and that means you can play any color mana or colorless mana to be able to put them down. Usually these are things that either get you more mana or they are equipment, which give you bonuses and abilities to a creature that is equipping that equipment. Lastly, tokens. So if you have a card that says when this enters the battlefield, you create a token creature, it means that it's kind of a fake, like a shell of a creature. So if it's a 3/3 green beast, you now have a 3/3 green beast, but it just kind of dissolves once it gets killed and it doesn't go in your graveyard. It just is gone because it's a token. Let's get into the anatomy of a card. I've picked this one, Black Bloom Rogue, as an example because it has lots of the attributes that I want to go over. When you're looking at the top right corner of the card, you're going to see some little symbols with different colors in them, and that's going to be the spell cost. They can be colorless or have a color, or they can be multicolored. Lots of times they're going to have one or multiple colors and then some colorless. So with this one, you can see that it costs 2 colorless and 1 swamp, 1 black mana. And that is what you need to pay in order to put this down on the battlefield. The name of the card is going to be on that top space here. Then in the second bar, you have the creature type. So this one is a human rogue. They can be all sorts of things, but sometimes this matters because you'll have other cards that have effects that apply to only one specific creature type. This top text is going to be attributes. So this one has menace, which it says this creature can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. I'll go into some other attributes, but generally that's where you're going to find it. The middle text is going to be the main intrinsic ability. So this one is Black Bloom Rogue gets +3/+0 as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So this is something that will always be true for this creature. Under that, if applicable, This one doesn't have any. The bottom text will have activated abilities, so those will have little mana circles next to it that tell you how much you need to pay. Sometimes you need to tap the card to do it, sometimes you don't, and those are things that can be activated at instant speed. So anytime in the game when you can play an instant, you can activate that ability, if you have enough mana, that is. Then sometimes there's little flavor text down at the bottom, which is funny. And then on the bottom right is going to be the power and toughness. These can change when you have counters, and usually what you'll do is just take some dice and put them down there so that you can see how many counters you have on there. Some are double-sided. This one happens to be double-sided. You'll see this little symbol up in the top left. If it is, this card also is Black Bloom Bog, which is a land. And lands can have, this is a non-basic land, so it has abilities. You can, it'll enter the battlefield tapped, but if you tap it, you add 1 black mana, and it'll tell you that on the other side there is something else. Next up, we'll go over some vocabulary. So first up are attributes. These are some things that you might see. In my example, I had Menace on Black Bloom Rogue. So other things that you might see are flash. This means the card can be played at instant speed. This will usually be on a creature. It just makes it so that you can play it on someone else's turn or put it out when you might not normally be able to do that. Putting things out on another person's turn is helpful because the mana that you spend will be untapped on your turn again, so you don't need to use it all up on your turn. If something has death touch, it means that if it deals damage to a creature, that creature will die instantly. So sometimes if you have something in death touch, you're going to want to keep it up as a blocker. If it has lifelink, it means that you gain life equal to the damage dealt. And that damage dealt can go into the negatives. What I mean by that is if I have a 5/5 creature and you block it with a 3/3, I'm still going to get 5 damage worth of life because I did 5 damage even though you could only take 3 damage. Haste means something can attack on the same turn it is played. Usually creatures have something called summoning sickness, which means that they have to sit there for 1 turn before they are able to attack or do any of their tapped abilities, but haste means that you don't have to pay attention to that. Indestructible, pretty self-explanatory. It means it can't be destroyed and you need to find another way to remove it off of the battlefield. The way that Magic cards are released is in sets, and sets often have themes, both in kind of a general aesthetic sense and in a mechanical sense. So there's going to be some attributes and abilities that are unique to the sets, which I will dedicate a separate video to because there's way too many to go over even at all. I've been using the word counter a lot, and what that is it's just a bonus that you get to put on the power and toughness of your creature. So if I have something that's a 3/3 and I put a +1/+1 counter on it, that becomes a 4/4. But the base power and toughness is still that 3/3. There is no way to get through all of Magic the Gathering in one video. So this will be it for today, but please leave a comment if you have any questions or requests for what I do in the next video about Magic. Thanks for coming along.